Hello, and welcome to We Love History Live. My name's Danny. I work for Historic Environment Scotland, and I'm based in Aberdour Castle in the beautiful wee village of Aberdour in Fife, where I'm a gardener. Throughout the lockdown, Historic Environment Scotland have been making these videos to provide a little insight into the work that we do. So today we're going to get a little sort of behind-the-scenes glimpse of the day-to-day life of the gardeners at Aberdour. So I'm going to be speaking to a couple of my colleagues. This is a question and answer session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the comments section, and we'll endeavour to answer as many as we can today. If not, we'll try and get back to you with a written reply. You can comment just by signing into YouTube with a Google account. So without further ado, I'll introduce my colleague, Mo. Hello, Mo.
Hello, lovely to be here.
How are you?
I'm very well and very excited about this.
Good, good. Glad to hear it. How's the lockdown going? Having fun?
Well, hopefully we'll be all over soon.
Yes, fingers crossed. Can actually get back to a bit of work. Do you maybe want to start off by telling us just a little bit about Aberdour Castle and the gardens and why it's so special to work there?
Right, so Aberdour Castle Gardens and the castle itself is indeed a very old monument dating all the way back from the 12th century, and it passed many hands in a way till we actually got here. What you can see in this picture right now, you can see an aerial shot of Aberdour Castle Gardens itself. So you can see big L-shaped terraces that were actually excavated in the 1977 and onto 1980s. You can see the big square orchard at the bottom, where we have around 75 apple trees, one of the main historical features that we have in this castle. On the left-hand side, you can see the walled garden, where we have our Edwardian sort of modern herbaceous borders, and the castle itself, of course. We are located next to beautiful Dower Burn, and we have some sort of wildlife areas and a little bit of woodland there as well. So Aberdour Castle Gardens itself were actually developed in the 16th century by Regent of Morton. It was speculated and known to have been probably Renaissance pleasure grounds. So if you could imagine, it would have been very formal, symmetrical gardens aligned with a castle, with a topiary, beautiful borders, and not gardens across. Sadly, through the history, not many of those things survived. So after the excavation of the terraces in the 80s, the terraces now has been laid to grass, and the main plantings takes place actually in the walled garden, which used to be and still is the 17th century bowling green. And the herbaceous borders were developed much later. So if you just pass around the next slide, we can just see some pictures of our current herbaceous borders. Sorry, just
up shortly. Yeah.
There we are here. So this is our herbaceous borders in a walled garden, basically in the middle of the season. There is still a lot of work going on there right now, where we are trying to redevelop the borders that has been left for a while and introduce new plantings. So it's something to actually look all the year around, and it's really special all years. Sorry, it's very special. Doesn't matter what time of the year you get there, you get the autumn colors from the climbers and a lot of color interest in the herbaceous plantings. Yeah.
What about the, obviously being such an important historical site, we have certain limitations in what we're allowed to do in terms of the design of the place and the planting that we do. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that? Yeah,
so basically because so much archaeological investigations has been done in the 80s and 70s, like I said, most of the grounds, that's actually, you can see the picture of the investigation from the 1977 when they were just excavating that site to repair the terraces. So because of such a high importance, most of the grounds are scheduled for the architectural remnants under the ground. So we are very limited what we can do on the terraces right now. That's why it's been laid to grass. So for example, we can't dig any deeper than 30 centimeters into the ground because we might disturb something that is under there. But that's, I guess, one of the challenges that you take on when you work in the historical garden. You have to very carefully think what you can and you cannot do, and try to fit into that frame what is actually appropriate.
Of course, you've got to be sensitive to the character of the site, haven't you? And make sure that things, you couldn't just throw in a contemporary garden and ignore the historical aspect of it.
Obviously, the garden itself changed quite a lot, and we have some pictures from probably 1960s, I would guess, from the walled garden and the front terrace itself. And you can see then you still had a similar layout at the back of the walled garden with a herbaceous border, but the bowling green around the sundial would have had probably rose plantings and very formal borders as well. The front terrace would have very formal paths and little topiary around it. Sadly, right now, we are still working to reestablish some of it. So hopefully in the future, we will be seeing a bit more than just grass.
Yeah, it's work in progress.
It's work in progress, always.
Exactly, yeah. What about sort of day-to-day working in the castle? I feel strange asking you because obviously I know, but for the benefit of people at home, what about day-to-day working in the grounds? How much of it is garden maintenance and grass cutting compared to, the layout, the design? What happens behind the scenes that people might not necessarily see?
Well, regarding the design itself, we do quite a lot of it, especially in the walled garden. So when we came and started working there around 2 years ago, a lot of the herbaceous borders were actually quite neglected. So we had a big challenge how to actually bring them back into life and bring in a bit more interest. So for the wall garden, we've been doing quite a lot of designs. You can see one of our very sort of DIY looking but very colorful design that all of us collaborated together to pull together for one of our borders that meant to come through this year, but sadly during the lockdown, we had to delay our plans. So in the wall garden, we do quite a lot of designs ourselves. And then of course we are responsible for making it happen. So clearing the borders, making sure that the soil conditions are ready to go, getting the orders in. And for example, this is the picture just when our delivery arrived and we were so excited that border to come up and get it going. And then of course we try to grow quite a lot of those plants ourselves. We have a glass house that has a small cacti and succulent collection, and we grow quite a lot of annual plants ourselves. So that's the picture of our succulents and our propagation on the other side as well. So we really try to uptake as much responsibility as we have to get this garden going, really.
Yeah. I'll just a quick side just now. We've just had our first couple of questions through. That might be nice, break things up a bit. So we have a question from Caroline. When it comes to borders, do you have any tips for when you need to move plants? She has patches of irises and a stilbe and needs to move them. How can she do that without harming them? So that's something we do quite a lot in the garden.
Yes, we do plenty of that. So I would say not to worry. Herbaceous perennials like that are very, very tough plants. So when you need to move them, wait till the winter, wait till November or December, cut them back completely right to the ground. Don't be careful about it, just cut this right back to the ground. Then dig them up, lift them out, take a fork or a spade and divide them in as many plants as you want. Clean them up, move all the dead material, and then you're happy to move them either in your pots or in a different location in the border. Don't be afraid to harm them at all. They will come back because they're really quite tough plants.
I think people often have that fear that these are little delicate things, and then they'll maybe cut through the garden and they'll see us just whacking through a couple of iris with a spade. A lot of the time we'll use a knife, so you can be quite full on with them. And they can handle it, as long as you're not damaging too much of the root, they'll be fine, they'll come back.
Especially with the iris, it's actually advisable to use a knife. So when you lift the big, nice root, the corm that the iris is formed of, you can take a knife and literally slice them in half. You can slice off any dead material from it, and then take the iris and plant it back up, but make sure not to cover too much above the crown of the actual plant, because then it might rot. Iris especially likes a lot of that sunshine hitting that root. So just make sure you plant that out just on a surface, firm it in, and it should be just fine.
Right, and Caroline's followed up just asking when she should replant. Well, you can do it either way. You can either replant in the autumn when things are going to have a little bit of time to settle before the ground gets too hard, or you can do it in early spring before things start growing again, and they'll be happy enough. We've got a second question there from Susan, which is, what is the climbing plant on the wall that showed green in one photo and red in the other? This is a favourite.
Oh, that is our favorite as well. It's called Parthenocissus tricuspidata. That's the Latin for you. Otherwise, it's called the Virginia creeper. You can get a hold of it in any garden centers if you just ask for Virginia creeper, and that color is just amazing. Comes the autumn, it really brightens up the garden.
Yeah,
so
brilliant
Virginia
plant.
Creeper, yeah.
That one technically isn't even in the castle grounds. It actually belongs to the church next door and just grows over the wall.
And we are not planning to cut it back at all. We're absolutely loving it.
Absolutely love it. Right, so what can we move on to now? So with our, as we were talking about the design and stuff that we've been looking at a lot is prolonging our flowering season. Because obviously there's whenever you talk about gardening now, it's a lot about beneficial insects, your bees, hoverflies, butterflies, and what we can do to help them in any way we can. So if people were looking to prolong the flowering season or the season of interest in their garden, do you have any recommendations for how they might do that?
There is plenty ways. There are plenty of ways. So, for example, when you have your garden is up and going in the summertime, you have all the flowers there, everything's forming seed heads and is beautiful. People are sometimes quite quick to actually start cutting it back and tidying up. I would say, don't hurry at all. Leave it. As you can see in one of the pictures just here, so that's a Jerusalem sage. And if you, for example, leave the seed heads on it, comes the winter, you get this beautiful frost that forms all the way around it. So don't be in a hurry to tidy up your garden. Also, such things for early spring as different bulbs. So your daffodils, your crocuses, your tulips, get them, plant them in as many as you can, cram them in together, and comes that early spring, you're going to have a lot of color in your garden. Other thing, do not forget about evergreen plants or semi-evergreen plants. So something that constantly keeps that shape in a garden. So it might be grasses, it might be small or large shrubs, the conifers, different hues and stuff like that. Use those in your garden just to help to build that evergreen color and the shapes. It really helps.
Yeah, well, that's I think an important concept within gardening nowadays is the sort of layered planting approach that you talked about, where you have these bulbs in between all of your later flowering things. So in springtime, you'll get your bulbs like your snowdrops, daffodils, tulips, and things coming up alongside things like even primula, hellebore, and things. And then as they die back, you need to have considered a second layer of plants that are going to push up through that. So that's most of your sort of early summer flowering and things like foxgloves, lupins, and everything. But then, like you said as well, evergreen or even just leaving seed heads to get that late summer interest is vitally important, not just for the aesthetic, but insects will use hollow stems of herbaceous things as shelter. Leaving your stems to sort of die and stay there will give the crown a certain bit of frost protection as well. So it's definitely beneficial, not only for the look, but for the benefit of the garden to do that. So I think it's definitely something people should take on board.
The other thing, don't be afraid to use Google. You know, these days online you have beautiful plant finders, especially from the Royal Horticultural Society website. So if you're not sure really what flowers when or what should you put where, use that Google search. Google plants for early spring, plants for early winter. It's really quite that easy, and they would give you massive lists of different varieties and different stuff you can put in there. And then you don't have to stay there and worry what's really works or what's not. The internet is your friend, and use it.
It will do the work for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's really just that easy. We as gardeners use it all the time. When we run out of ideas ourselves, we go and Google it and we look at pictures and we find out what works the best.
Yep. And you'll find things like in that previous picture, sorry, there was the asters and the Rebecca. That picture was, I had a look at my phone, it was taken in like 30th of September, really, quite late in the year. And they're still going strong, they're still flowering. So just look into it, see what plants are known for either flowering late in the season or having a really long period of flowering. And these things will help keep your garden interesting.
Yeah.
Off to one side again, we've had a couple of questions about the circular structure shown in the 70s photo of excavations. That's coming from Leslie. What is that structure?
That is our dovecot. So 17th century dovecot where they used to keep their doves. It has around 600 nesting boxes, if I'm right. And it's been standing there all the way from that Renaissance era of beautiful gardens that we had back then, and we're hoping to restore one day. But yeah, that's our dovecot, and it's open to the public. Once the castle reopens, please come and see. It's absolutely beautiful inside, as you can see all the nesting holes in there, and look through the release valve right at the top. It's absolutely gorgeous.
It's an interesting part of the garden. To answer Sammy, it doesn't really get used for anything in particular. It's essentially an artifact, a sort of point of interest of the garden, but it is fully accessible when the castle is open, so it's worth getting in to have a wee look around. We've had another question come in from Rose, which should be an interesting one. It's, is climate change having an impact on the gardens in Aberdour, and do you have any tips for gardening in the face of climate change?
Well, yes, we're living through it, and we're trying to adapt as we go. I guess last year we can really say we had an unusually wet year. Danny, if you remember those crazy storms that were coming up every week, basically, and just washing down the gardens. So we're really trying to adapt the plantings, which can be a bit tricky as we are learning about the climate change as we go, really. So some years might be very dry, so we are concentrating on those sort of drought-resistant plantings, and that was one of our main idea for the new border that is just about to come up, hopefully next year. So we were thinking about, all these different plants that could really cope with that dry, hot summers that we are having. But then again, you have to think, well, there's been a lot of rainfall, and how do you cope with that? So we're trying to soften up the landscape as much as we can to absorb that rain, to maintain our trees in a garden as well. That really helps with that drainage and really, really helps maintaining that balance in the garden within. But like everyone, we are learning as we go, and it's not easy. We're trying to do our best, of course, to reduce our emissions, not to use growing media that is from peat and stuff like that. We're really trying our best, but it's a challenge every day, I think. Danny, would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. Like everyone's, it's not even about the sort of big decisions that we have to make. It is just about day-to-day changes. So like moving to electric tools, for example, or trying to, like something we want to look at is a bit of a tough sell. Is reducing our mowing regime, because at the moment we've got so many vast areas of manicured lawn, and obviously that takes input from petrol, it takes input from people, and it also removes quite a lot of flowering species. So there's something that we're going to have to try and work on, and put a proposal together, is to introduce that more. But like I say, it is a bit of a hard sell because it can look a bit untidy, it can look a bit unloved. So it's about finding the balance there.
If we could find a picture of our orchard somewhere there in our archive. So our orchard has a very, very sort of rich, meadowy undergrowth. And we are keeping that way because we are trying to encourage the biodiversity in there. We try and encourage those plants to come back and grow naturally. We're not mowing that much, so we wouldn't be using so much input. Yeah, I think maybe the next picture. Yes, that's it. That's a better representation. So providing the shelter for different wildlife to come and hide and have a refuge in this very manicured landscape is very important. And these softer, sort of more wilder landscapes are very, very important, I think, to providing all of the main environmental services like the drainage, the CO2 emissions reduction, the carbon sequencing. All of that is really important. And I think every single garden is challenging themselves as much as they could to introduce a bit of that wildness instead of having things so much manicured.
Yeah, so I'd say for Rose, a tip would be maybe you don't have to cut your grass as often. You can leave it. If things like daisies or clover begin to flower, just leave them because they provide important pollen and nectar for these insects. Things as well that we've started to do in the banks surrounding the orchard is we've left piles of logs or just piles of detritus around, which will again provide like a winter habitat for various insects. And you encourage these insects, they in turn bring in the predators, and you end up with an entire ecosystem just by taking these simple steps. So yeah, if you have to just leave piles of garden waste effectively, and it will provide the habitat for whether it's bugs or hedgehogs or whatever. But it can be a tough sell, like I say. That's what I'd recommend.
Yeah, so we are lucky because we are in such a sort of wild area around Aberdour. Like I mentioned, we have that lovely burn that goes around, and we have a little bit of woodland management around there to do as well. We are lucky to have wildlife in there. So I think just a second ago, we had a picture coming up of the common newt that we found there, or we have frogs and different insects. We have different mushrooms growing there, and it's always a lot of fun to find around things like that around there, and try to take care of them as best as we could and give them shelter and love.
Precisely, yeah. Right. So hopefully that answers your question, Rose. We've got another one coming from Julia. So we have plenty to do in the summer, but are we also working during the winter months? Are we getting the gardens ready for spring, or what sort of stuff do we do over winter apart from hiding from the rain and drinking coffee?
Well, I always say that summertime is time for the results and beautiful views, and wintertime is when the hard work happens. People usually don't see that. But yes, wintertime is all the planning and trying to decide what's coming up next year, planning our propagation, getting all the seeds and pots ready, digging over the borders and pruning our 75 apple trees that we have there, and clearing up all the leaves and trying to keep it as tidy as possible, really. So when the summer comes, it all just looks super neat. So I do believe that the winter time is actually the super busy time. I do apologize. My phone is dying slightly, so I'm quickly going to plug it so we can continue. Sorry, guys.
It'd be a bit of a strange chat if it was just me talking.
I apologize for this.
In the meantime, I'll just move on. We've got another question from Caroline. She has several geraniums that are trying to take over. What's the best way to manage them? Her garden is full of geraniums. I think when this parent garden team first sort of moved in, there was a lot of geranium wargrave pink, which is a beautiful flower, really good ground cover, but it does spread like mad. Fortunately, it's another one that you can be quite rough with, and if you see them sort of moving out into places you don't want them, you can just whack it with a spade, dig sections out, remove it. And a good idea, I would say, is to plant other things that are going to, because basically the more plants you have, the less weeds you'll have. And if things are spread where you don't want them, they're effectively a weed. So it's just try and keep your borders busy, or alternatively mulch as well is another way to just keep things in check.
I would say that it's very important to remind yourself that perennial plants have to be lifted, divided, and replanted, say, every 3 years. In that way, they're keeping very, very healthy and they don't spread out too much. because what's happened, they're starting to die in the middle, and then they just keep on growing out. And geranium is a perfect description for that. So don't leave it there for too long. Every 2-3 years, lift it, divide it, check that bit that doesn't look good anymore, and put it back in there if you want it in there. If not, you can always replace it with something a bit less invasive.
If you're digging things out and dividing them as well, you're getting free plants. Give them away to people, move them around your garden a bit, you know.
The other good method for these very sort of invasive plants, like the geraniums, is plunge them in your soil in the pots. So take a 3-liter pot, plant the geranium in that pot, and then bury that pot inside in the soil, and then it doesn't spread that much. And when it comes to lifting and reducing, it's actually much easier. You can just take it out, rip a wee bit off, and put it back in there.
Good. Just another question come through from Liz. With the impact of climate change, are we seeing a loss of native Scottish plants? That's possibly a bit of a tricky one for us because, you know, I'm not necessarily sure that there's ever been that much present. Certainly since we've been in the castle, it's been, you know, planted. You know, your native plants tend to be your wildflowers.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very difficult to answer this because I would say our orchard is probably the height of this example. So we do have these very common species there, like different vetches and buttercups and a lot of common grasses and stuff like that. However, that area has been very much improved because historically, once the castle gardens declined, the area was grazed and used for agricultural use. And this is the main sort of thing happening all over the UK. So the more you improve the soil, the less variety and biodiversity you get in your plantings there. Well, maybe not plantings, but basically the
wild species.
Yeah, the other species.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
I would not dare to say that we are noticing anything like that in the garden, because we are doing our best to propagate those things and get them back out there. So in those wild areas that we have, we would grow things in our glasshouse, harden them up and take them out and plant them out. So these things going back into the nature and actually are free to self-seed after. But I would not dare to say that I'm noticing it.
Yeah, I think it would certainly be more of a problem on wild sites, because obviously ours is looked after, so we can support things like that. Whereas, you know, things like the Scottish primrose, I mean, that's seen sort of a migration north with climate change, with the change in weather. So things like that, there is definitely an impact. But in a managed garden setting, you might not see it.
Yeah. The only one thing that I must admit that we do have a problem on site is the invasive species. So we have something called the Himalayan balsam seeding alongside the dower burn, and we have the Japanese knotweed in our garden as well. And for the last 2 years, we've been working very hard to actually eliminate them, because what they do, they encroach of those natural habitats and then reduce the native biodiversity in those areas. So for us, it's very important to control these things all the time. So I know that those are there and we're working very hard to remove them, but hopefully that does not impact long term. And in the next 2 to 3 years, I'm hoping that those nasty invasive plants will be gone.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
So moving on, we've kind of covered the orchard, haven't we, and the sort of orchard floor, but it's like you talked about the maintenance that we're doing, the restorative pruning. Could you maybe tell us a bit about that and what's the current goal in the orchard?
All right. So like I mentioned before, we have around 70 apple trees in there, because quite a lot of them are not in the best shape, really. So we've been doing a lot of work there. We have around 15 heritage varieties, including such varieties as the Stirling Castle, and John Grieve, the Beauty of Bath. So all of them are very beautiful cooking apples that would have been used very long time ago. However, like I said, we have multiple problems in there. We have a lot of deer damage that they just come in and graze, and as cute as they are, we don't really like them. We try to chase them away as much as we can. So for the years, the deer have been grazing quite a lot on our apple trees. We have problems with canker. So it's a bacterial disease infection that is very common in Scotland, especially because of this very, very sort of wet climate that we have. And we have general damage over the years because the orchard itself has been planted, I think, in 1990s. So obviously we are 20 years later now. So it's quite a lot of work to do. A lot of trees lost their shape, so we've been working to prune them back, some of them being pruned back quite hard. Other ones just needs bits and bobs taken away. But so yeah, we've been working hard to trying to take them back into the shape. And historically, this orchard is actually very important because it's one of the main original features that actually remains on site, despite the fact that it has been replanted in the 90s. We do have the record from the 17th century when the Earl of Morton sent a plant order to what was then the Physics Garden in Edinburgh. So these days, Edinburgh Botanic Gardens. And the plant order included such things like cherries and plums and mulberries. So we've been now looking into how to restore this glory of this orchard that was there before, and had big plans to introduce a bit more variety. So the orchard wouldn't be just cooking apples, as much as we like them and our visitors like them a lot, because we usually give them for free when the harvest comes. Yep. So we are hoping to introduce a bit more variety in there, so our visitors can just come to the tree, pick a plum or pick a cherry and have a lovely munch. I think we can bring up a picture there now of our harvest in one of the years, if that's possible. There we go. So hopefully the harvest will increase year by year, but right now, whatever we are harvesting, we're just letting our visitors to get a little baggie from the visitor center, and they're happy just to take them away and make chutneys and pies.
Yeah, no one has brought us an apple pie yet, but if you are watching and plan to make an apple pie at any point, we will take donations.
That's a little hint.
Yeah. Right, so moving on, finally, what's your favourite aspect or favourite plant of, or favourite bit of working at Aberdour Castle?
Well, plant-wise, I wouldn't be able to say what, because every season there is something else that I absolutely love. I think what I really love about working in Aberdour is the hard work that we have to overtake. I believe we have some pictures there from a very happy moments. So, you know, I just love those moments when we work really, really hard and we finally manage to reach the finish line. We getting our plants, we getting in there, we getting ready to plant, and I think our team that we have is absolutely delighted. We have an apprentice as well. You can see him in a picture there, getting ready, all kitted out, getting ready to go and trim. I think we're going to have a chat with him in a minute, don't we? He's going to join us and tell us a bit more about his apprenticeship. So yeah, I really think that those moments that we achieve, those very long-waited projects, are the best. I think we have.
It's the satisfaction of starting a task and seeing it through, and then just sort of standing back and going, yes. And
a year later, we are there, and we are absolutely delighted. I think we have a couple more pictures there of Ali eventually managing to pull out a big forsythia that was overtaking the wall garden. So that was a big achievement for him. That was a brilliant day because it took us around, I think, 2 days to pull that out. And there is me.
I've never seen him happier.
Little border, yeah. What about you, Danny? What do you think is your moments?
For me, like, obviously I love the garden throughout the summer when things are growing and having a great time and everything just looks great. But it's when the days start to get shorter and when we turn up for work in the morning, it's not quite light yet. If you can go out on the front terrace, just as the sun comes up, it's just an absolutely beautiful place to be. It's a great place to start your day. I think there's maybe a couple of photos of that hidden somewhere. But for me, it's just that, like, even, you know, when the weather's not great, when it's cold, when it's bitter, I can still go to work and go, like, yeah, I'm I'm just having a lovely time.
Yeah, those sunrises over the St. Filian's Church is just absolutely amazing. The mood usually in the morning is just glorious, isn't it?
Absolutely stunning. Yeah. No, it's great. There we go.
Right.
Us embracing death in the garden some more as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think what we're going to do now is I'll move over to Ali.
Yeah, let's go over to Ali. Ali is our apprentice.
And we will find out what he gets up to.
Hello. Hello.
Is Ali there?
Hello, am I?
He'll be with us shortly. In the meantime, strike a pose. And here he is. And here he is. What a glorious transition that was.
Yes,
Hello, Ali.
yeah.
Hello, Ali.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Hello.
How are you? How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. Just enjoying living in a top floor flat where there is no garden. That's
good. Yeah, good.
Part.
Yeah, same boat. Yeah, same boat. Here. Lovely, isn't it? Lovely, isn't it? So you are an apprentice for Historic Environment Scotland. You work with us at Aberdour Castle. You want to tell us a bit about the apprenticeship programme and what you do? What do you do, Ali?
What do I do?
What do you do?
It's really been a baptism of fire, I think would be a very good way of explaining it. That's me 2 years into my 4-year apprenticeship now, and I came from a background of countryside management, so kind of getting dropped in. This was my first real horticulture experience in a kind of manicured environment where you've got to take care of each individual flower and make everything look nice, whereas my background was throw some trees into a hillside and then leave it.
Job done.
Yeah, and then that was it coming in as well with Mo 2 years ago, and that was it. The gardens had they were just looking a little bit neglected, so I didn't realize at the time how much work it was going to be. And
you thought this was like a step into retirement.
That was it. Yeah, I was like 27 at that point. I was like, it'll be easy. I'll just cut some grass, no problem. But it's been great working with Mo and then with you, kind of just getting exposed to so many. I haven't really felt like The Apprentice, which has been nice. It's not like most apprenticeships seem to be go and make the tea, go and make the coffee, go and clean the shed, whereas that's it. It's just been dropped in at the deep end, having to learn every plant that we have in the garden, having to learn every machine, every tool, every method of propagation, everything that we can do to keep plants alive. But it's been really enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah, good. And as part of your apprentice, you also attend college, so you end up with qualification as well as.
Yeah, so that's it. It's a 4-year apprenticeship, and that's me just finished the qualification that I was meant to do. I managed to skip the final exam because we weren't allowed to. But
what a bonus.
Yeah, so then that's left me the next 2 years of the apprenticeship to kind of figure out if there's something I want to specialize in, if there's kind of any skill set that would benefit us as a team that I could kind of look into developing, which has been great. And that's it, getting paid whilst studying has been real nice.
A mind blower, that.
Yeah, highly recommend apprenticeship.
Yeah, great. And what about, I've just covered it with Mo, but have you got like a favourite aspect of the garden? Is there any particular thing that you love coming to work for?
I would say the break room.
Break room. Solid choice.
Yeah. What you guys were saying about the early morning sunrise, that's great. The way that we get into the garden is through the castle. So we're on the dark side of the castle, and the first thing you do in the morning is open up the big castle door, and the sun's just in front of you. That is incredible.
Yeah, it's glorious.
And the fact that that's it, the castle's got 1,000 years of history. So because it's been such a such a variable place, and the landscape and the gardens are always changing. It means that if we're looking for inspiration for what we're going to do with the gardens or a direction for the design, we're not really limited to like, oh, we have to do it for this like design that we found from the 1750s or something like that. We've got a huge big history, but also not very much concrete plans to work with. So it leaves a lot of interpretation for us. It means that we can be really creative with kind of how we figure out what to do with the gardens and stuff. The grass parterre that we cut into the top terrace, I thought that was a really good way of kind of linking in the past with what we could do currently and kind of giving a hint of what it used to look like and stuff. So that's been great.
That's certainly interesting because it's definitely a sort of contemporary feature, but it's based on a historic style of gardening.
Yeah.
So it's bringing together the past and the present, which I think is really important in a historic site.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something we could look at doing more of.
Yeah, that's it. And the designs that we've been working on for the borders, they've been trying to incorporate kind of plants that might have been there initially, plants that are, as you were discussing earlier, like ones that will kind of survive through the year, ones that maybe will resist kind of any changes in climate and stuff like that. So it's been really interesting.
Right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for us today. Thank you very much, Ali. And thank you very much, Mo. I think we'll get her back to say a wee goodbye too. But yeah, thanks everyone for taking the time to answer these questions, and thank you everyone who's written in, everyone who's watching. Like I said, this is a Q&A, so even if there's any further questions you want to ask, feel free to add it to the comments, and we'll have a wee look later and try to get back to you with something later, if we know. If not, just Google it, be fine. And thanks very much to Hez for having us.
Yeah, and I would just like to say we're hoping the castle will be reopening soon, and when we are ready to get back there, please come visit us, talk to us, find us, ask all the questions that you like, bring your pictures, even bring in your plant if it looks really bad and you need advice. We are always there to help and advise anyone with any sort of inquiry, so please come us and get some of those apples in autumn.
Great.